All right, back here on the game, John Kurtz, Mitch Fortner with you. We check in now in Morgantown with Mike Casazza, who covers West Virginia for the West Virginia 24/7 site. Really appreciate the time, Mike, in joining me here. We've been trying to gauge the temperature of everywhere else in the Big 12 right now as we all weather this conference realignment storm that kicked off about a month ago with Texas and Oklahoma starting their trek to the SEC. So what is the mood in Morgantown? How would you characterize that right now?
If you follow West Virginia a little or a lot, you know to some degree that there's always another shoe mentality in the history of the football and basketball and even other sports here. When things are lined up for the best thing to happen, the worst thing happens, and there's that perpetual fear that something bad is going to happen. And I think that what's spooky this time is that you buttress that mentality with the fact that the last time they went through this, they were really close to being excluded, being Cincinnati or UConn or someone like that, because they really got into a tug of war politically with Louisville and almost ended up not in the Big 12, and it was pretty clear the ACC was not going to take West Virginia. So what happens? Maybe things are very different, but they ended up on the right side there, and it seems just overly optimistic and maybe presumptuous to be a fan of West Virginia here and say that a good thing is going to happen again. It can, but will it? You don't assume that here. And then you see all this stuff about not only the Big 12, let's call it collapsing, that's probably accurate, but the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 10 mobilizing to compete with and against the SEC. Well, who's on the outside in there? It's West Virginia and the conference that it's a part of, and that's not a great feeling right now. Optimistic, sure, extremely tempered, and a little bit spooked too.
Can definitely understand that. And the ACC that you brought up is, look, everybody draws that logical comparison there because of the geography and what you mentioned last time, that there was at least like some level of flirtation there. But how realistic is it? Like, what are the expectations right now regarding how realistic it is that West Virginia could find its way in the ACC at some point?
Yeah, well, flirting is harassment if it's not reciprocated, right?
Yeah,
if you're just kind of like one end of the bar and the other one is not really looking your way, then to what extent is that really a flirtation? And sure, geography is logical here. The map hasn't changed in a long time, and they've been passed over in several iterations of expansion before we called it expansion or realignment, when different conferences disbanded or you had teams just move from one to the other. Just the simple migration back in the 50s and 60s before it became a thing to do in the 2000s. And it just never happened. There's different reasons across time, but again, the things that you think make sense now made sense then, and it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that what's past is prologue, but it's also kind of silly to say that just because it's a better trip or that it's more fan friendly that it's going to work. There's I don't know, some sort of a bias, whether perceived or actual, about West Virginia's academics. West Virginia's academics are not of AAU status like in the Big Ten, but you could really qualify some of their, for example, admissions and graduation and GPA. They're a state school. They enroll people to get them educated. Not everybody makes it, but they exist to make sure that people from poor, impoverished, and down in your luck parts of West Virginia get a chance to go to college, which is a good thing. Do they all make it out? No, but different things. They have a really good research status, but they don't have all the bona fides of these AAU institutions, and some of them are in the ACC, some are not. But that's something that you apparently have to have if you're going to have a seat at the table. But they also have a really strong following. They have automatic rivalries built in that would liven up, you would think, attendance and TV ratings and scheduling for football and men's basketball. But you just have a sense that maybe the ACC isn't expanding, and if they are, you have this whole thing about how much money West Virginia's worth, because there's a huge gap now between the ACC and their annual payout and that just terrible TV contract, and the Big Ten and the SEC and their growing annual payouts. Does West Virginia move the needle so much that they make up ground? Never mind catch up, just make up some ground? Probably not. And at that point, the ACC just kind of thinks, why are we going to let these people in where they can compete against us, beat us, out-recruit us? They could add to their athletic department and win trophies and championships that we can. That's a hard thing to talk people into in that boardroom.
Mike Casazza talking with me right now from the West Virginia 24/7 site. Yeah, and I think this question that I'm about to ask may be basically moot at this point after we saw the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big Ten taking steps toward an alliance that was reported by The Athletic on Friday. But, there's such a concern right now already with West Virginia and travel, and I know that the travel budget has to be just astronomical for West Virginia and the Big 12. If something were to ever come to fruition from Bob Bowlesby's 6-hour meeting with the commissioner of the Pac-12, is that something West Virginia would have any issue with, be out on, or is it just, hey, desperate times, desperate measures, you kind of have to take what you can get there?
Yeah, I would think that something's already come to fruition, and it was the meeting between the ACC, Pac-12, and Big Ten, right? Something between that Pac-12 and Big 12 meeting didn't work, and that makes me think that they weren't in that conversation. They weren't looped in for a reason. And it may also be because the most likely outcome right now is that the Big 12 just absorbs, 4, 6, 8 very good to maybe not quite as very good group of 5 teams, which if I'm West Virginia, I'm really hesitant about welcoming Cincinnati and UCF and Boise State and Colorado State to the party, because that levels the playing field an awful lot. So then again, that's when it kind of comes to desperate times and desperate measures. So a Pac-12 relationship could make sense if it's Big 12, Pac-12. I don't think it would be just a traditional, like, you're going to see West Virginia play a Tuesday night basketball game out in Westwood, or that you're going to see Cal coming to Morgantown to play on a Saturday at noon. I don't think that's going to be part of the scheduling rubric. I would think it would be something where, let's just say hypothetically, that the 7 Big 12 teams in West Virginia, so 8 total remain, they play each other, and then you add to that to get to whatever magic number of conference games, 9 or 10, by playing, let's just say 9, by playing one home game against a Pac-12 team and one road game against a Pac-12 team. And you do something similar in basketball where you play your 14 round-robin games in the Big 12, and then you're going to play maybe 3 home and homes against Pac-12 teams, something like that. It just seems like it's stupid to mix these all up in like one cup and treat West Coast Pacific Standard Time teams with largely Central Standard Time and one Eastern Standard Time team. I don't know how that makes sense. That's good for anybody. I don't want to hear the academic nonsense anymore. That's clearly not the part of this mission for athletics, but just for logistics, for TV, for fans, for competitors, why do all that travel? That's pretty dumb. Which means that's probably what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's conference realignment in a nutshell, basically. Yeah. Mike Casazza talking with me, who covers West Virginia. I know Neil Brown's been killing it on the recruiting trail. I think very highly of him as a head coach, and it seems like I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for a coach of one of these 8 schools right now to try and recruit based on the negative recruiting and the uncertainty that surrounds all of that. Have you guys been able to pick up on it affecting West Virginia's recruiting here in the last month or so far?
They right away, this is kind of what I was going back to, they're recruiting their best class ever. This is going to be, it could sneak into the top 25, maybe top 20 if things go well. That's probably not going to happen now, but that just doesn't happen here. They're a developmental program. They get 2 stars who turn out to be 4 stars, or 3 stars who turn out to be 4 stars NFL players. So it's kind of exciting to see them doing things and getting players that are, one, highly regarded, but also highly coveted. They're beating Pac-12 and Big Ten, ACC, SEC schools for these players. Right away, they had like a scare because a receiver they thought who was going to commit backed off, and you're thinking, uh-oh, and he deferred his commitment date. But he just wanted to have the recruiting graphic ready so he can go on Twitter and Instagram and have it. So you kind of exhale there and say, all right, maybe this won't be that big of a deal. But just last week, they lost the commit that they had, or a kid who was going to commit, they thought, and he ended up going to Michigan State. Now, he's from Michigan now, but is that because the Big Ten could say, we're not going anywhere, we're going to be here for a while, and Michigan State's going to be under our umbrella, and that's a safety net for a player, or that's reassuring for a player? It might be. I don't think that they'll have a hard time with this current class because, one, there's just not a lot of places for them to go if they want to decommit. So they could back out, but what's to say they're going to get a Power 5 offer? They may be a Power 5 player, but SEC and Big Ten and ACC schools are filling up just as fast as West Virginia, maybe faster. They may not have a landing spot. Where it's going to get difficult is, one, in the presence of inactivity. They're not able to forward the conversation and say, we're going to be all right, don't worry about it, we got a seat at the table. They can't say that. So when they go into high schools in the winter and they're trying to get kids for the next class, not the ones that are coming up, but the 23 kids, that's going to be hard because they're not going to be able to answer questions that those kids are going to want to ask. And then if things do happen, so if there isn't inactivity, but there actually is activity, it's probably not going to be going in the Big 12's favor, and those questions become more important but even harder to answer. So immediately, I don't think it's a problem. I think time is on their side here and that there's not a whole lot left. But when you flip that calendar when you're talking about kids in the 22, 23, 24 class, that's going to become problematic, I think.
Well, this is a question that really could be asked of just about anybody in the remaining 8 here. I ask it in part because you mentioned some pessimism on the side of West Virginia fans just naturally right now. But Neal Brown, I mean, I think I'm not close enough to know for sure about this, but being a guy that came from SEC country when he was at Troy, the thought has always been like, hey, wouldn't an SEC job be enticing to him? There's all of this uncertainty around the future of West Virginia and what conference they'll play in, lead people to be more pessimistic about the odds of Neal Brown sticking around long-term in Morgantown.
Well, yeah, I mean, if he's a big-time player, he's not going to want to coach in a minor league, so I wouldn't begrudge him for that at all. His contract's really easy to get out of, too. They made the buyouts very friendly. There's some goofy clause in there where if the president, who's like almost 80, if he's not here anymore, or the athletic director, who's kind of a star in the industry, if he's not here, just one of them, never mind both of them, but if either the president or the 80 isn't here, his buyout plummets. So, like, he's played this the right way. I don't think he did because he knew that the team was going to be out of the Power 5 conference. But let's be honest, what does an AD that gets kicked out of a Power 5 conference want to do in a Group of 5 school, right? Maybe he leaves, and all of a sudden Neal Brown's off the hook. What if the president can't get his team onto the right island in another round of expansion? Why does he want to stick around? Maybe it's time to pass on somebody else, so then Neal Brown's buyout goes down. That's an actual conversation that needs to exist with people because I'm sure lawyers and agents know about it too. That's why those things get included. Again, not specifically for this, but if the conditions change upon when you sign your contract to when you want to exit it, that still happens. So again, maybe you think a retirement or just somebody getting a promotion, a higher job in athletics, maybe that's one reason. But conditions changing also mean that you're not coaching in a Power 5 league anymore. You don't have access to, or as great a level of access to the college football playoff, to New Year's Six bowl games. Those are the highest prizes you're playing for. And if you don't have great access to it, you're certainly looking for a better place to coach.